Carly stepped onto the vessel where her mother once lived, marking her first visit since the disappearance. The 28-year-old was shaken visualizing her mother's ghost on deck. Carly Ellsworth did not fly to the Bahamas to mourn. She came to pressure test her stepfather's narrative, just one of his many versions of that final night. The Bahamian tides, the Abaco docks, and that cursed boat, all key pieces in this dark forensic puzzle. The witnesses from that evening would either validate the story or shatter it. Carly went seeking truth and returned with 5 heavy questions. One question she spoke aloud. Now, you and I must remember Brian Hooker has not been charged in this disappearance. His legal team has denied all allegations of wrongdoing. Before we walk this case together, do me one favor, hit subscribe, so you don't miss the next piece of evidence as it surfaces. And drop a comment with your first instinct. Does this story sound like an accident to you or something else I read everyone? We are looking at public records, sworn witness statements, and Carly's own recorded interviews as we reconstruct this case. These facts are documented in the public domain. As of today, the investigation remains wide open. What Carly carried to the Bahamas was no mere hunch. It was a cold, organized list of suspicions. Her first real doubt surfaced on that Sunday night, sparked by a phone call from her stepfather. Calling from the islands, he spoke in a flat, eerily relaxed tone, claiming her mother was simply gone. Brian called me, so I picked up. It was around 9 at night, she recalled. He casually told her, "Yeah, your mum is missing." Records suggest that call was placed sometime between 8 and 8:30 that night. The man on the other end of that line was someone she had known for 25 years. He married her mother when she was only 4. She was 28 then. To her, that voice did not sound like a man whose wife had just drowned at sea. That was the first gut instinct a daughter has that an outside investigator might miss. Her mother was 56 and no stranger to the ocean. She was anything but a novice sailor. Why wouldn't she swim back? Her family asked. Lynette was an athlete, a swimmer who had sailed for over 10 years. 4 years prior, she liquidated her Michigan home to pursue a life full-time on the open water. She and Brian had spent years navigating the Gulf and the Caribbean. They had been docked in the Bahamas since February. Their digital footprint under the handle. The Sailing Hookers paints a picture of a happy couple in Marsh Harbour. They posted endless hashtags from their deck chairs, projecting the kind of retirement dream that most people only talk about. To the outside world, they were just a content couple on a serene boat. To Carly, who had been closely tracking the health of her mother's marriage, the public image and the private reality had diverged long before that April 4th night. Then came the recording. Brian left a voicemail later leaked to the press, stating that search and rescue had finally found the flotation device. "Hello, honey. I just heard from the search team. They found the flotation device I threw to Mom, but no sign of her yet." He used terms of endearment, said he loved her, and then simply disconnected the call. Carly released that audio because she wanted the world to hear a man delivering a status report, not a man in agony. The rhythm of his voice sounded like someone reading a weather forecast, not a man recounting the last moments of his wife's life. You and I have to look at the question she posed back then, one that has never left the record. Why, she wondered, would a husband whose wife just vanished overboard fail to drop anchor and search for her? If she really did go over, it feels like he just decided to take advantage of the chaos, she claimed. Why would she be swimming away from the dinghy? I simply do not understand it. Why did he head for shore instead? Carly told the press that if it were her, she would have stayed in that water. They would have been together. Most importantly, they would likely still be alive. She admitted to investigators that long before April 4th, she had a dark premonition that something like this would happen. The history between her mother and Brian was turbulent. These events in the Bahamas felt like the heavy fulfillment of a grim prophecy. In her mind, she had spent years anticipating this disaster, and now it was finally playing out in real time. That is not the reaction to a tragedy. It is the reaction to a long-feared crime. It was the sound of a long-feared outcome arriving. Her grandmother, Darlene Hamlet, provided another chilling layer of evidence. Darlene revealed on a podcast that Lynette had recently purchased a one-way ticket back to the United States. "I discovered that she had already booked her flight home to Miami," the grandmother stated. "She had a one-way ticket home, but you and I know she never made that flight." Lynette was done. Her mother described a marriage of extreme highs and dangerous, volatile lows. It was a classic cycle, leaving him then returning over and over in a desperate loop. Alcohol was the catalyst for his hostility. A few drinks transformed Brian into someone cruel and full of hate. That is the profile. It was not just words, it turned physical. Carly's testimony matched her grandmother's. Carly spoke to a local station, WZM13, confirming that drinking had poisoned her mother's marriage. The fights happened more often when they drank, she said. And recently the drinking had been getting worse. Now the fear is that something happened out there that can never be undone. Arguments turned violent when they drank. They had been sober for 18 months before falling back into the bottle again. These are not rumors. They are part of the public record pulled from interviews given by the daughter. Beneath the current chaos lay two older pieces of documented history. In 2015, a Michigan case file shows both Brian and Lynette accusing each other of domestic assault. Prosecutors denied the warrant because the aggressor was unclear. But there was also a child abuse charge in 2006. A jury acquitted Brian, but these records provide vital context. Not proof of murder, but certainly a pattern. Carly did not fly to the Bahamas on a whim. She arrived with a detective's mindset and 5 specific questions. She needed answers that only the islands could provide. She brought her boyfriend along. She was not taking any chances. Her questions were deeply personal insights a reporter would miss, born from 24 years of observation. Those questions had haunted her for decades. The Bahamas trip was her chance to finally test her own theories. First, she scrutinized the environment. Brian's story relied entirely on the behavior of a specific stretch of water. He described currents that could swallow a swimmer, lose a dinghy, and vanish a body from every search team. That is a very convenient description of the sea. Carly had to see if the reality matched the narrative. Reality told a different story. She immediately went to the Royal Bahamas Police Force to sit down with investigators. She coordinated with the Coast Guard to gain access to the Soulmate, the sailboat her mother called home. For the first time since the disappearance, she stepped on board. She later recounted that heavy moment in interviews. In a televised sit-down with Dateline, she described how she just sat there on the deck of that boat. She stared at the empty space and began speaking to her mother as if she was still standing there. It made it all too real, she admitted. The sadness hit her hard as she sat on that deck. She spoke to her as if she were present. When asked what she said, the answer was heartbreaking. "Hey Mum, I am here for you," she whispered. "I just want to talk to you to see you again." She told reporters she half expected her mother to just step out from the cabin and end the nightmare. To her, the Soulmate wasn't a crime scene. It was a home filled with clothes, mugs, and memories. Every corner of that vessel screamed of her mother's presence and her deafening absence all at the same time. She took what she could, a simple headband and a gold necklace shaped like the letter L, items her mother wore daily. She also grabbed a handmade picture frame and a piece of her grandmother's sewing. When she finally stepped off the boat, she was wearing that headband, a piece of her mother reclaimed. It has stayed with her through every interview. But the next step was the most critical: the water. She retraced the route Brian claimed they took from the Abaco Inn, seeking the cold truth in his wake. Navigating from Elbow Cay toward the yacht, she studied the channel and the dangerously shallow stretches of sea. You could see the bottom clearly. The shore was right there, never more than a short swim away. A local captain, Manistee, gave me a precise description of the channel where the Hawkers were traveling. At low tide, it is only 4 feet deep. Even at high tide, it barely reaches 10 feet. 4 feet won't drown you. 10 feet won't hide a body. And the shore lights, they are always visible. A person in that water, he said, would never lose sight of the land. What we are looking at here is a clear, shallow, and highly visible stretch of water. Even at high tide, the water was shallow enough to touch the sand. Brian's story was starting to sink. As a detective, I find his lack of action puzzling. He's a tall man. Why would he not just dive in to save her? Boats cross the area, frequently flanked by luxury resorts and a busy coastline of rental homes and private docks. The daughter told reporters that the spot where her mother allegedly fell was so shallow she could have simply stood up after a few strokes. The physical geography tells a different story. This one observation alone destroys the foundational premise of her stepfather's entire account. His statement implies open ocean. Our investigation reveals a narrow channel. He claimed a powerful rip current pulled his wife away. However, the evidence shows water so clear and shallow that you can see the bottom. His story required invisibility. He wants us to believe a swimmer vanished without being spotted from shore. Yet this stretch of water is visible from every possible angle. Despite the visibility, there was only an absence. By the time we saw Carly arrive, the search had already lasted nearly 14 days. Authorities in the Bahamas officially shifted the mission from rescue to recovery after only 3 days of searching. We brought in cadaver dogs and professional divers. Every possible angle was checked by drones in the air. Even the United States Coast Guard found nothing, no body, no clothing, and not a single personal item belonging to Lynette was recovered. We recovered the life ring Brian claimed he threw, but found zero evidence it ever came into contact with his wife. An athletic, experienced sailor vanishes in broad daylight. The water was crystal clear and the channel was flanked by resorts and inhabited islands. As the crime scene photos show, she was wearing a bright green cover-up. That should have been easy for any boat or drone to spot from a distance. The scene raised the first question. Now you and I must test the timeline. In his first statement, Brian claimed they left the Abaco Inn around 7:30 that evening. That specific timestamp is critical. It allowed him to claim the sun had set and that darkness hid her disappearance from view. His explanation for how an expert sailor disappears hinges entirely on one thing: a complete lack of visibility. Then the surveillance footage arrived. Investigative reports revealed new imagery that changed the entire scope of the case. The video clearly shows the couple heading toward the water at 6:40 p.m., nearly an hour earlier than he claimed. That is a massive discrepancy. On April 4th in the Bahamas, the sun is still up at 6:40 in the evening. The sky was still bright. This new evidence proves their departure occurred during the day. Our data shows sunset in the Abaco Islands during early April occurs right around 7:30 p.m. A departure at 6:40 means they had almost 1 full hour of daylight left while they were on the water. Leaving at 7:30 means total darkness. These scenarios are simply not interchangeable. We spoke with Jim Todd, a local rescue volunteer who met Brian that morning. He explained exactly why this revised timeline is so damaging. The original story happened in the dark. The truth happened in the light. In my experience, those are two very different cases. He was firm. You simply do not lose sight of someone in the water during the day. Let us examine the bartender's statement together. He served Brian that afternoon, and his story adds a new layer. The witness confirms they arrived around 4:30 that Saturday. Brian went straight to the bar. According to him, the wife headed toward the pool immediately. He barely caught a glimpse of her as she walked past. It was a crowded afternoon. Brian ordered 2 drinks and remained unusually silent during the entire transaction. This witness knows these local waters well. He told us the travel times Brian reported simply do not match the actual duration of that trip. It is highly suspicious that Brian reached Marsh Harbour without a single soul along that busy channel spotting his wife. Even Brian admitted there were issues with his story during a recorded call we obtained from investigators. He claimed they overstayed their welcome and headed out far too late into the dead of night. He described a series of tragic failures. But that theory only works with a 7:30 departure, not the one we found. If the timeline starts in broad daylight, the failure pattern he is describing essentially evaporates. Then we have the conclusion. Brian claims he spent hours paddling and drifting after his wife went into the water. He did not reach the boatyard until 4 in the morning. That leaves a 9-hour gap from the time they left. He spent 9 hours in calm water just half a mile from shore lights. Yet he never signaled for help or called for rescue until the end. The daylight timeline does not hold up, and his story about the ending is just as flawed. There is a massive window in those 9 hours that you and I still cannot explain. Brian claims he screamed for an hour, but in the silence of that channel, there was no one to hear him. That leaves us with roughly 8 hours. In those 8 hours, a man with a paddle and a dinghy with shore lights visible on 3 sides of a narrow channel. And a mobile phone that presumably worked at the Abaco Inn bar just a few hours earlier, moved slowly toward a destination that wasn't the nearest help. No distress call was placed, no flares were fired, no flashlight was used. Not a single staffer boater or local resident reported seeing any signal from the water during that entire window of time. Those 8 silent hours are the second seam in his story, and just like the first, it is loose. Nothing from his attorneys has tightened that gap. 2 seams both failing. The third test was the visual record. This is where the reporting sharpened. You and I need to look at what Carly saw directly during that investigation. A photograph surfaced of Lynette at the Abaco Inn at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon on April 4th. She is seated wearing a green bathing suit cover-up. That detail is critical because Brian, in his descriptions to searchers, claimed his wife was wearing a black two-piece swimsuit. He never mentioned the green cover-up. To a search and rescue volunteer, that omission was a massive red flag. A green garment completely changes the visual signature of a body in the water. It changes the probability of spotting someone from a rescue boat, a drone, or the shoreline. For days, drone operators and shore teams were scanning for black fabric, not a green cover-up. Whatever the reason for that discrepancy, the searchers were looking for the wrong clothing the entire time. On the podcast episode, Jim Todd of the local rescue team noted that Carly had flagged this issue herself. Carly told investigators that when someone goes missing, the specific visual description is everything. People need to know exactly what to look for. Brian failed to provide the full picture of his wife's attire. A second image released on April 22nd appeared to show Brian Hooker himself. He was walking alone toward the dock carrying that now infamous yellow dry bag. The photograph shows one man and his bag. There is no wife at his side. On its own, the picture does not prove guilt, but it raises questions about those final minutes. Let's consider the narrative. This frame simply does not fit the story of a couple departing together in rough waters. It shows a husband moving alone. Then there was the sea itself, the visual record that also pushed against him. We obtained video from that evening showing the Sea of Abaco. The water was flat, calm. These were not the violent, choppy conditions Brian blamed for his wife's disappearance. His voicemail about being reckless staying too long with no life jackets felt like a partial confession to a different failure. But the physical record of the sea doesn't support an accidental ejection from a small boat. Waves can capsize a small boat. A sudden squall can certainly overturn it. But a calm sea in a well-marked channel is simply not the theatre of a sudden fatal fall. Not unless something inside that boat changed the equation. The questions were getting sharper. What Lynette wore that last afternoon was not what Brian described to the rescue teams. The image of a couple walking to their boat simply does not exist in the record. The only image we actually have is of a man standing alone. And the rough seas he blamed the photos from that hour proved they never existed. Every piece of evidence pointed to one conclusion: he was alone. Then came the fourth test: context. This was a test only a family member could truly understand. The press could talk about the marriage, but Darlene Hamlet knew the truth inside it. She revealed her daughter had already bought a one-way ticket home. She was planning to leave him. That revelation reframes everything about what April 4th really was inside that marriage. It wasn't just a random vacation day, it was a weekend inside a ticking clock. Darlene said her daughter had left Brian before. The marriage was full of serious dark lows. She admitted she feared for her daughter's safety, describing a husband who turned mean when he drank. This wasn't a one-time incident, it was a pattern of red signals spanning several years. You and I are left with a mother fearing for her daughter's life. Testimony that paints a very dark picture. The mother testified that alcohol was a constant problem and their fights escalated whenever they started drinking. She reported that the couple recently began drinking again after staying sober for nearly a year and a half. That specific detail about returning to alcohol is exactly the kind of nuance a reporter simply cannot manufacture. It is the kind of intimate knowledge that only exists within the family circle. April 14th. Just one day after Brian was released from police custody, he left the Bahamas for the States. His lawyer claimed his mother was ill, though he had just told the press finding his wife was everything. Carly went public through the New York Post, stating clearly that he was not a man of his word. A relative told the press that Carly, guided by the facts and her own instincts, never plans to speak to him. Let's look at this together. These facts paint a picture his legal team cannot easily explain away. The woman he claims drowned in an accident was, according to her mother, already planning to leave the marriage. When he had to choose between staying on the island to search for his wife or leaving, he got on that plane. I see the same behavior patterns before and after April 4th. The man's actions remained cold and entirely consistent. To an investigator, neither of those patterns fits the profile of an accidental widower. That grandmother's quiet public statement remains one of the most damning pieces of evidence in our entire case file. A mother does not go on camera and admit she was terrified for her daughter unless she's been living with that fear for a very long time. Darlene Hamlet described a slow-burning alarm, years of motherly intuition that in her view turned out to be tragically right. Crucially, she never said that her daughter's disappearance on April 4th came as a surprise. She admitted to having many dark, unanswered questions and that the family had been terrified for Lynette's safety. The way a mother describes her daughter's troubled marriage is not a narrative that is constructed overnight. It is a conclusion reached after years of keeping thousands of smaller, painful observations to herself. Then there is the one-way ticket. We found she bought a flight home to Miami, a permanent one-way ticket, but she never actually made it onto the plane. That one detail sharpens our timeline, when a woman buys a one-way ticket to escape her husband. The final weekend before she is supposed to use that ticket becomes a very dangerous kind of countdown. Lynette did not vanish from a happy home. This was not a marriage that was drifting along peacefully. According to her mother, she disappeared from a relationship that was in its final volatile hours of existence. We are looking at a context that shifts the probability. It makes the idea of an accident in this home seem much less likely. The fifth test was purely behavioral. What does a man do after watching his wife drown? Who does he call? What is the tone of his voice? What is his instinct? Does he reach for the anchor or the paddle? Brian's own description of the event was chaotic. He even told a friend in a recorded call that he threw the anchor out last. He said he couldn't explain it. By the time he finally set that anchor, he was nearly half a mile away from the spot where his wife went under. He claims he yelled for her for an hour, then he paddled, but he didn't head for nearby Elbow Cay. He paddled across a massive stretch of open water toward Marsh Harbour, finally arriving at the boatyard at 4 in the morning. Look at his choices. The operator goes overboard, taking the engine keys with her. The boat is now dead. The engine was dead. Any responsible person's first instinct is to secure the boat's position so it doesn't drift away from the victim. The anchor is your primary tool. Dropping it immediately is the only way to halt the boat's drift. But dropping it last, after drifting nearly half a mile in the current, only serves to maximize the distance from the person you are trying to rescue. According to Brian, he did exactly that. Then, he spent an hour shouting into the water. That is his story. Shouting into the darkness for an hour is a long time when the lights of the shore are clearly visible. It is also a long time to go without firing a flare, blowing a whistle, or trying to restart that engine. He made no attempt to signal the many boats or rental homes that were lined up along the nearby coastline. That hour of shouting got him nowhere. So he paddled, but again not toward the safety of Elbow Cay. Elbow Cay had everything a marina docks and even a volunteer fire and rescue squad ready to assist him. Instead, he paddled toward Marsh Harbour, arriving hours later at a boatyard to finally report his wife had drowned. He chose the longest possible route. That decision remains the primary structural flaw in his entire version of events. Stick with me. If he had dropped the anchor first, he would have stayed near her. If he had aimed for the closest shoreline, he could have found help much faster. In my experience, someone falling overboard like that is rare. Why was she swimming away from safety? Why bypass the dinghy? Why didn't he anchor and search? Stick with me, because this just doesn't add up. I asked if the dinghy had an anchor. He said yes. He is the last person to see her alive, but the voice on the line next day shocked Carly. Monotone, completely relaxed. To me, that voicemail about the life vest sounded disturbingly calm for a husband. Hello, honey. Search and rescue just called me. They found a flotation device that I threw out to your mother. They haven't located her yet, but they are narrowing the search area now. They are still out there looking. This sounded like a man giving a logistics report on a search team. He did not sound like a husband mourning a woman he had been married to for 25 years. Then he made a move that caught my eye. He left the Bahamas one day after his release. His lawyer blamed a sick mother, but Carly saw it as a major red flag for his character. The man who claimed his only focus was finding his wife left the country within 24 hours. The Coast Guard was still out there working the case. He was already on a flight home. We look for patterns. This isn't a conviction yet, but the expected shape of grief is missing from his behavior. Those were the first 4 questions Carly kept turning over in her mind. She hinted at the 5th during every interview, though she never quite made it central. She delivered her central question on camera, aiming it right at the public in one 15-word sentence. It is the question that defines this investigation and haunts every file we have on this case. She is not asking if the ocean caused this. She saw the water. She knows it could not. She knows the timeline is broken, and she does not need to ask if he was alone. The evidence photo shows him solo. She knows exactly what her mother was planning to do. Her grandmother confirmed the mother's intent. The suspect simply did not act like a man who lost everything. The question she finally spoke out loud overshadows every other lead. I do not understand how she drowned, or simply floated away. Look closely at her phrasing. She did not just say she did not understand why her mother drowned. She questioned both drowning and drifting away, the only two paths her stepfather's story provides. Not this or that. She called out both scenarios and dismissed them in one breath. The water simply could not have drowned her. Not in 4 feet, not in 10, and not within a few feet of a visible shoreline. And the current would not carry her off. Not in a channel where those shorelights are blindingly obvious. Both theories fall apart when you look at the crime scene the way Carly did. Let's look at this together. The real mystery here isn't a technicality. It's a simple matter of investigative math. If the water didn't kill her, the timeline is a total lie. He was alone and she was leaving him, then how exactly is she gone? That statement is blunt for a reason. She is not debating whether her mother actually vanished. She is gone. Not in Michigan, not on that boat, and she is not in any hospital on the islands. There is no record of her in the Bahamas. Carly is not denying the fact that she is missing. She is highlighting the massive hole in the only story we have for how she disappeared. Looking at Brian's narrative, the fall, the current, that life vest, it just does not hold up. A living woman does not just vanish like that. His framework is broken. That is what she is telling us. That is the core of her argument. It is the most haunting question in this whole file. Every investigator, every witness, and every volunteer out there is asking some version of that same question. But Carly put her name on it. She looked at the camera and asked 15 words that have no innocent explanation. She did not formally accuse him. His defense team notes there is no official allegation of foul play yet. She simply refused to accept a convenient lie just because the truth is harder to swallow. She identified the core issue. She presented it to the world, then went home wearing her mother's headband as a silent reminder. That remains the ultimate question. That is the question she voiced, and it is the one neither Brian, his counsel, nor any agency from the Coast Guard to the Bahamas police has managed to answer for me yet. So far, the legal system has not touched Brian Hooker. He was picked up on April 8th in Grand Bahama. I know they questioned him for about 3 hours at the Central Station. They cut him loose on the 13th. Prosecutors held back on charges, citing that the investigation was still ongoing at this time. His local attorney, Terrell Butler, put out a statement. He categorically denies every bit of wrongdoing his stepdaughter has alleged in her public phrasing. Up in Michigan, his lawyer, Crystal Marie Hauser, is asking the public to give him the benefit of the doubt. She claims there is not a shred of evidence to back up the stories from Carly and Darlene. She insists he would never have hurt the woman he was married to for 25 years. Those are his official statements on the record. It is exactly what his defense team is paid to say. But on my side, the investigative wheels are finally turning. You and I should note that ABC News reports the Coast Guard is now leading the probe into whether a crime actually took place out there. We have an open criminal file on this side. This development, reported by major outlets and confirmed by WZZM13, means the question of intent in Lynette Hooker's disappearance now sits with both federal American investigators and Bahamian police. In the public eye, Brian is now being called a suspect. No charges yet. I have to keep that distinction clear as an investigator. A suspect is not a defendant, not yet. Investigating is not the same as prosecuting. But the paper trail against him has been growing steadily since the day he walked free. The green cover-up, that yellow dry bag, the calm water on film, and the bartender's clear suspicion. The local rescuers don't buy it. Neither does the boat captain, who knows you do not just vanish in that channel. A mother-in-law's one-way ticket, the daughter's 5 questions, and that one haunting question she spoke out loud. Every bit of that evidence has piled up while he and his lawyers maintain a steady tone of denial. Legally, things are at a standstill, but we are both building cases. Carly flew home wearing her mother's gold necklace. She had a handmade frame and a piece of fabric her grandmother sewed tucked away in her luggage. She didn't bring home an arrest, and she didn't bring home a body. She came home with a single sentence spoken on ABC News that has since worked its way through every media outlet and into the center of my case file. She can't grasp how her mother just floated away. The volunteer who first searched those waters feels the same way. So does the bartender who watched them that afternoon. The captain who runs that channel every day doesn't buy it either. Neither does the photographer whose images show flat water on the evening the mother allegedly drowned in rough conditions. Even her grandmother. You and I aren't the only ones watching the evidence surface in real time as the public grows increasingly skeptical. It is hard to quantify what a trip like Carly's does for a case. It is not discovery we can use in court. It does not produce a witness statement that will hold up at trial. What it produces is a field report from a family member with unique standing. Carly is the only one who truly knows the history of that marriage and can still speak for it. She knew her mother's voice. She knew what was weighing on that couple's minds. She knew the toll of the sober stretches. She saw for herself that the marriage was nearing its breaking point. She took that history to the Bahamas and walked it against the physical place where the story supposedly ended. The baseline and the location simply did not meet in the middle. That is something a daughter can uncover that a prosecutor simply cannot. And it is something the news outlets cannot do either, no matter how many sources they manage to squeeze for information. Brian Hooker remains uncharged. He continues to deny any wrongdoing. His lawyers are working, his wife is gone, and the water out there is shallow. The shore is close. And the daughter who went to test a story came back with a question delivered on a national stage that no one has yet been able to answer. Stick with me as we track this Coast Guard investigation and see where the evidence leads us next. As more witnesses come forward and the Bahamian police decide whether or not to finally make a move. Please subscribe to this channel so these episodes reach you when they go live. My work depends on viewers who want these difficult questions to keep being asked. This program is for informational and investigative commentary purposes only. Currently, Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime regarding the disappearance of his wife, Lynette. Every individual we talk about today is presumed innocent under the law. Statements from family and witnesses are their own, representing contested claims from public reports that you and I must weigh carefully. The official record still shows Brian Hooker's legal team denying any wrongdoing on his behalf today. Our investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance remains active and no official conclusion on criminal guilt has been reached yet. This investigative file uses public records for the purpose of commentary and reporting, which is strictly protected under the legal doctrine of fair use here. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you hold any information that might assist the Royal Bahamas Police or the United States Coast Guard, please contact those specific agencies directly. Thanks for investigating with me.